Well, thank you very much, Yassine. Thank you very much, Narcisse. Thank you to IBEI and all of its associated partners. It's definitely a great honor for me to be here with you today. I remember well being in the same place that you are, with my parents sitting alongside me, asking me when I would get a job. It took quite a while, actually, but eventually I managed. That's the expectation of many parents, of course. The education is to get a job. But what I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit about my own personal story. I was with my family on the very first day of vacation in a very beautiful part of Menorca. If you've never been to Menorca, make sure you do it before you leave Catalonia, or rather Spain. It's a beautiful island. We had just installed ourselves. Dinner was cooking. We had just opened a nice bottle of wine. Our kids were playing football on the lawn. Everything was perfect. The sun was setting. I was just ready after a very exhausting period of work to just start a week or two of vacation with my family. And then the phone rang. I answered the phone, and the voice on the other end was in Spanish, but said, is this Mr. Freeman? Yes. Could you please stay on hold for the High Commissioner for Peace in Colombia? Yes. High Commissioner comes on the phone and says, Mark, it's good to be in touch with you. Listen, I have an indecent proposal for you. Could you come to Havana next week? And could you serve as the government delegation's advisor in what is now the most critical phase of the negotiations that we're doing with the FARC rebel group? I felt both elated, but also depressed. Again, this is my first day of vacation. And so the first thought in my mind was, what am I going to tell my family? But of course, when you receive a call like that, the answer to the question is always yes. What I want to discuss with you today, though, is why I got that call, why that call came to me, why I was on the short list of people that the High Commissioner for Peace in Colombia had in mind for this very specific role at a very critical juncture in a peace negotiation. Why did this call come to me? And that's the story I want to share with you in the hope that maybe some of it will be useful as you set out on your own international career and your own personal and professional journey. For me, it started really, in fact, when I was at Columbia Law School doing graduate studies. So I'm an international lawyer by training. And I was very fascinated by an area that didn't even exist as a field at the time I was studying it or attempting to study it. And it's called transitional justice. Transitional justice is it's an area of theory and practice that involves the question of whether and how societies face legacies of mass abuse at the end of a war, at the end of a period of authoritarian rule. Spain, of course, has its own history in this regard as well, having both experienced civil war as well as authoritarian rule. But what was fascinating about this subject to me, and again, I don't think there's any replacement for the choices that you make being guided by what gives you energy, what you're passionate about. There's really that's the starting point for any successful career. But for me, what was fascinating was the theoretical dimension of this, because in transitional justice, there's a really very difficult dilemma that these societies face. The basic dilemma is that the need for justice is at its peak. It's at its highest point. But the capacity or the willingness to deliver justice is at its lowest point. And so it presents a very difficult dilemma. But when I was studying this subject, transitional justice, it wasn't even a term that you could use in conversation. No one had even heard of it. But it turned out to be the thing that it turned out to be the launching point, let's say, for what ends up now being almost 20 years focused on questions of transitions, and in particular, how to deal with legacies of abuse as part of a transition. So then a little bit of luck came in. I graduated, and as I told you, my parents sitting beside me said, so what are you going to do now? And I didn't have a good answer. I just knew I was passionate about transitional justice. But as luck would have it, I came into contact very quickly with 3 people who were establishing, if you can believe this, the International Center for Transitional Justice. And where were they setting it up? In New York. And where was I? In New York. So, you know, there's always a healthy degree of luck. I think anybody who's had any bit of success in their life will have to acknowledge that luck plays a role. But there I was. And from the time I was studying this, trying to justify not having a job to my parents, honestly, within about 6 months, I found myself helping set up this international center. And within a year, I was flying around the world, and I mean really flying all over the world, together with this initial group of people with whom we were establishing a whole field and not just a center dedicated to this question. And again, it was a unique time. South Africa had just had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that had attracted global attention. There was a permanent international criminal court that had been established. It was a very exciting moment. I experienced my first time being in business class. I didn't even know what it was, but there I was flying around the world, advising ministers, meeting victims groups, providing strategy to truth commissions and tribunals, and I was living the dream, basically. And I lived that dream very intensely for a number of years. But this is where I want to, again, come back to the point that I really want to share with you. I'm living the dream, I'm practicing every day, I'm working nonstop. But there was a point, actually, where I realized I had to step out. I had to step out and re-enter the world of ideas, the world of theory. And that's because there's a point when you're practicing where I think if you're honest with yourself, you realize that there are some questions that you're still piecing together. You could be very busy, you could be very successful, but it could be very valuable, and sometimes in my case, it's almost like a compulsion, and I've seen this in many other people, to need to step out. And so what I did, and this time, again, my parents called me and said, "What in God's name are you doing? You're doing everything you love, now you're not gonna have a job." So what did I choose to do? Write a couple of books. There's no income in that. I wouldn't recommend it necessarily for anybody, but that's what I chose to do. And it was partly just to actually put together in my mind some critical ideas that were difficult to do because I was so busy practicing. So writing a couple of books was what I ended up doing. But in addition, I did some teaching. There's a quote that many of you have probably heard attributed to Albert Einstein. He said, "If you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you probably don't understand it yourself." I believe that theory very much, and I think part of what, again, led me out of my perfect job, living the dream, traveling the world, traveling in business class often, and now suddenly I'm sitting in my bedroom trying to write a couple of books for no money. What am I doing here? But it actually gave me the chance to understand. So teaching as well was something that I found was critical, because it forced me to be able to explain to people who had no idea what transitional justice was. I had to simplify it to its essence. I had to return to first principles. What happens after that? Well, after having no income for a couple of years, but producing books and doing some teaching, I decided I have to go back and do some work. And what I discovered was actually when I returned to do the same work I'd been doing, I returned to the same organization, I was about 100 times better than I had been when I left it. I'd become a master of an area in which before I was a practitioner. And it was an extraordinary experience. I mean, it was just easy. Everything was easy. And it was also rewarding. It was personally rewarding, and it was intellectually rewarding. And so there I was, now a master of this, in part because I had taken time out to return to first principles, to expose myself to the hard questions where students were asking, questions which, in fact, my practitioner colleagues had stopped asking because we were too busy working. So I was practicing it. I felt I was a master. Then, at a certain point, I switched jobs. At another point, I branched into a new field. And then the Arab Spring happened. And again, these are the kinds of things that you can't foresee that can arise in your career. The Arab Spring happened late 2011, early 2012, and I decided that it was time to set up my own organization. And it was an organization that was going to be dedicated to trying to marry theory and practice when it came to transitions. And again, for me, what happened is that it was the experience of practicing a lot and also engaging in the world of ideas and going back and forth between these worlds that gave me the confidence at that particular moment when the Arab Spring arose to say, I think I'm going to set up my own organization. There was a gap in the field that I could identify only because I had theory and practice. If I'd only had one of those, it wouldn't have been enough. Both were necessary, neither was sufficient. And so this organization, which today I direct, based here in Barcelona, I think we chose wisely the city. It's been a fantastic experience here. We're a very large organization now working globally. And I'm able, because of all the practical skills that I acquired in that process, because of the theoretical underpinnings which I kept trying to reinforce, mostly through passion, but also out of a practical need to try and put together ideas that were very difficult to sort through in my mind when I was too busy to sit down and step away and disconnect. To build an organization is something I could only have done because of those choices that I made. So now let me return to the question that I began with. Why did I get that call? Well, again, for me, if I were to just try and summarize, and again, this is advice that may or may not be useful for you. I don't presume it to be useful. I hope it might be. But I would say that the basic logic for me is that if you want to have a very big impact in whatever area you choose to dedicate yourself to in an international career, if you want to have a big impact, you're more likely to do so if you become a master of whatever it is you're doing. I don't mean become proficient. I don't mean become very good. But the degree of impact you can have goes up the more you are a master of that subject. But what I would say in addition to that is, in order to become a master, in my experience, the only way that can happen is if you are always operating and blending and dipping in and out of the world of theory and practice. In my experience, I have yet to see anybody who truly astounded me in the areas in which I work, who didn't in some manner or other reflect this basic life pattern. These are people who write books, the people who I admire, the people who have been mentors to me, the people who I see have transformative impact, change paradigms in their fields, are people who have this combination. It's not, again, something that you can chart out. You can't map out exactly what the path will be, but I would urge you to at least think about the importance of theory and practice, and probably within that, especially theory, the world of ideas, and really devoting time, disconnecting in order to devote time to ideas and to return to first principles. Practice, I'm sure you'll get plenty of, but taking the time to step in and out of the world of theory is critical. So in that regard, I mean, well, I'll end with is just a comment about what I'm doing this summer, and it shouldn't surprise you. I'll be going to Menorca with my family, and I'll be writing a book about actually finishing a book about the experience I had, because I did say yes to the High Commissioner for Peace in Colombia, as I would do to any other such call, and have always done. And I'm writing this book. I'm finishing a book about that while I'm with my family. And again, I'm looking forward to it, because it's going to be a chance for me to put together an incomplete puzzle that I'm still trying to grasp from the experience of a year and a half advising inside of the peace talks that took place with the FARC rebel group. An extraordinary experience, but so intense that you need to eventually have the distance of time and the distance of space to put together what's important from it. And when I return eventually to practice, I expect to be better for having chosen to take the time out. And so the only thing I'm a little bit afraid of this summer, of course, is that while I have my perfect plan to be with my family and to write a book, that the phone will ring. If it does ring, I know what I'll say. Thank you.